The scream tore through the trees before Marcus Doyle even reached the clearing, and he already knew something was wrong. Not the ordinary wrong of a training accident or a border dispute. This was different. This was the kind of wrong that made the hair on his arms rise before his mind caught up with his instincts. He broke through the last line of pines and stopped cold. Elena Hartley stood in the center of the clearing, her pale hair catching the moonlight, her hands trembling at her sides. Behind her, 3 unfamiliar wolves melted back into the shadows of the forest, gone before Marcus could get a clear look at them. She turned to face him, and for one unguarded second, before she rearranged her expression into practiced calm, Marcus saw something flicker across her face. Guilt. "Marcus," she said, her voice smooth as ever, "I heard something moving out here. I came to check." He did not answer right away. His eyes swept the ground, the broken branches, the fresh tracks pressed into the soil, tracks that led away from the pack's territory in a direction no patrol had been sent that night. Something had happened here, something Elena did not want him to see. "You came out here alone," he said finally. "At this hour." "I couldn't sleep." She smiled, and it looked almost real. "You know how it is, being new to a pack. Everything still feels unfamiliar." Marcus said nothing more, but he did not believe her. He had not believed her for 3 months, not since the night she arrived at Ashwood Territory wearing a wedding dress and a smile that never quite reached her eyes. It had started the way these things always did, with promises of peace. 2 packs, Ashwood and Ravenwood, had spent a generation locked in quiet hostility, neither side willing to strike first, both sides certain the other would eventually try. When Alpha Gabriel Voss received word that Ravenwood's leader, Adrian Cross, wanted to end the conflict through a marriage alliance, the pack elders had celebrated. An end to decades of watching their borders. An end to losing wolves to skirmishes that solved nothing. Gabriel had agreed, believing peace was worth almost any price. His pack needed rest. His people needed to stop burying their young. Elena arrived on a cold morning in early spring, riding in a car with tinted windows, dressed like she was attending a formal gathering rather than walking into the heart of a rival pack. She was beautiful in a sharp, deliberate way, the kind of beauty that seemed measured rather than natural. She greeted Gabriel with a graceful bow and a voice that carried warmth in every syllable. "I hope," she had said, looking directly into his eyes, "that I can be worthy of the trust your pack is placing in me." Gabriel had been charmed instantly. He was a good leader, strong and fair, but he was also a man who wanted badly to believe that the long war between the packs could finally end. He wanted a wife who understood duty, who could stand beside him and prove to both packs that unity was possible. Elena seemed to offer exactly that. Not everyone was convinced so easily. Ivy Sinclair, the pack's healer, had watched Elena's arrival from the porch of the medical house, arms crossed, saying nothing, while the rest of the pack gathered to welcome their new Luna. Ivy had spent her whole life reading pain and sickness in the body, learning to notice what people tried to hide. She noticed the way Elena's smile did not match the tension in her shoulders. She noticed how Elena's eyes moved across the gathered pack members, cataloging faces rather than greeting them. "She looks like she's counting us," Ivy murmured to Marcus later that evening as the celebration feast wound down and the younger wolves drifted off toward the fires. "Counting us for what?" Marcus asked, only half joking. Ivy did not answer, because she did not know. She only knew the feeling in her chest, the same feeling she got right before a storm broke, when the air went still and heavy, and every animal in the forest seemed to sense the danger before the first drop of rain fell. In the weeks that followed, Elena settled into her role as Luna with unsettling ease. She learned the names of every pack member within days. She visited the elders and listened patiently to their stories, nodding at the right moments, asking thoughtful questions. She organized meals for families who had lost wolves in old border conflicts. She seemed, on the surface, like exactly the kind of Luna Ashwood needed. Gabriel fell for her completely. He began seeking her counsel on pack matters that had once belonged only to his closest advisors. He started deferring to her opinions on trade agreements with neighboring territories, on how to handle disputes between families, on when to increase patrols along the border. Elena always had an answer ready, always delivered with calm confidence, and Gabriel, exhausted from years of carrying the pack's burdens alone, welcomed the relief of sharing that weight. Marcus watched this shift with growing unease. He had been Gabriel's beta since they were young wolves training together in the same yard, long before either of them carried the responsibilities they did now. He knew Gabriel's instincts better than anyone, knew when his friend was making a clear-headed decision and when he was letting hope cloud his judgment. This felt like the second kind. "You don't trust her," Gabriel said to him one evening, not as an accusation, simply an observation, as they walked the training grounds after the pack had gone to sleep. "I don't know her," Marcus corrected. "There's a difference." "She's trying, Marcus. Everyone can see that." "Trying to do what, exactly?" Gabriel did not have an answer for that, not one he was willing to say out loud, and the conversation ended there, the way most conversations about Elena seemed to end. With questions nobody wanted to examine too closely. Ivy kept her own quiet record of the things she noticed, small entries in a journal she did not show anyone. The way Elena asked pointed questions about the pack's stored supplies, phrased casually enough to seem like idle curiosity, but specific enough to make Ivy uneasy. The way certain pack members who had once been close to Gabriel found themselves reassigned to distant outposts, always with reasonable explanations, always suggested gently by Elena during private conversations with the Alpha. The way messages sometimes arrived for Elena from unfamiliar numbers, messages she always stepped away to read. None of it, taken alone, meant anything. Together, it formed a pattern that made Ivy's instincts scream even when she had no proof to offer. She tried, once, to raise her concerns with Gabriel directly. "I'm not accusing her of anything," Ivy said carefully, standing in the Alpha's study while afternoon light slanted through the windows. "I just think we should be careful about how much access she has to sensitive pack matters, at least until we know her better." Gabriel's expression cooled immediately. "She's my wife, Ivy. She's the Luna of this pack. What exactly are you suggesting I do? Keep secrets from her?" "I'm suggesting caution. I've had enough caution to last 3 lifetimes," Gabriel said, and there was an edge of exhaustion in his voice that made Ivy pause. "This pack has been at war in one way or another since before either of us was born. Elena is the first real chance we've had at something different. I'm not going to throw that away because of feelings that can't be explained." Ivy left the study with her concerns unspoken and unresolved, and though she did not raise the subject with Gabriel again, she did not stop watching either. It was Marcus who found the first solid piece of the puzzle, though he almost missed it entirely. He had gone to the pack's records office to review the quarterly supply counts, a routine task he performed every few months to make sure nothing had gone missing or been mismanaged. What he found instead was a discrepancy he could not immediately explain. Funds allocated for winter preparation, stores of grain and medical supplies meant to sustain the pack through the harshest months, had been redirected weeks earlier under an authorization Marcus did not recognize. He brought the ledgers to Gabriel that same night, laying them out on the desk between them. "Someone approved this transfer," Marcus said, pointing to the signature at the bottom of the page. "It's not your handwriting. It's not mine." Gabriel studied the page for a long moment, his jaw tightening. "It's Elena's. I know. She has authority to approve pack expenditures. That's part of her role as Luna." "I'm not disputing her authority," Marcus said. "I'm asking why she redirected supplies meant for our own storehouses to an outside location, without telling either of us." Gabriel had no answer for that. For the first time since Elena's arrival, Marcus watched something shift behind his friend's eyes, a small crack in the certainty he had been holding on to for months. "I'll ask her," Gabriel said quietly. "There has to be an explanation." But when he did ask, later that night, Elena's explanation came so quickly, so smoothly, that it left no room for further questions. A miscommunication with the storehouse coordinator. she said. A shipment meant for a neighboring pack in genuine need. Approved in haste because the request had been urgent and Gabriel had been occupied with border negotiations. She apologized for not consulting him first, promised it would not happen again, and by the end of the conversation, Gabriel found himself comforting her rather than questioning her. Marcus heard the story secondhand and did not believe a word of it, but he had no proof strong enough to challenge Aluna's account, especially not one Gabriel seemed determined to accept. That was the pattern that defined the following weeks. Small inconsistencies would surface, always explained away with practiced ease, always leaving Gabriel slightly more convinced of Elena's innocence rather than less, because doubting her now would mean admitting he had misjudged something this important. And admitting that felt, to him, like admitting the whole hope of peace between the packs had been a mistake from the start. Meanwhile, in the clearing where Marcus had found Elena that unsettling night, something had shifted permanently, even if he could not yet name what it was. He kept the tracks he had seen memorized in his mind, the direction they led, the size of the paw prints that did not match any wolf currently living within Ashwood territory. He began, quietly and without telling anyone, to keep watch of his own. Ivy noticed his silence had changed too, had taken on a new sharpness, and one evening she found him standing at the edge of the training grounds, staring out toward the tree line as though he expected something to emerge from it. "You saw something," she said, not a question. Marcus did not turn to look at her. "I saw wolves that don't belong to us, meeting with our Luna in the middle of the night, in a place no patrol had reason to be watching." Ivy felt the same cold certainty settle into her chest that she had felt the day Elena first arrived. "Did you tell Gabriel?" "Not yet." "Why not?" Marcus finally turned to face her, and there was something tired and grim in his expression that had not been there 3 months earlier. "Because I don't think he's ready to hear it. Not without proof, strong enough that he can't explain it away." "Then we get proof," Ivy said. For the first time in weeks, something like resolve settled over both of them. Whatever Elena Hartley had come to Ashwood territory to do, whatever plan she was quietly executing beneath her careful smiles and gentle words, they would not let it unfold in silence any longer. Somewhere beyond the borders of the pack's territory, a storm was building, one that neither of them could yet see clearly, but both of them could feel approaching with every passing day. And Elena, walking back toward the pack house that night with the moonlight silvering her pale hair, allowed herself one small, private breath of relief. Marcus had seen the wolves, yes, but he had not seen enough. Not yet. There was still time to finish what she had come here to do. Time to complete the promise she had made to her father long before she ever wore Ashwood's colors. Long before she ever stood beside Gabriel Voss and let him believe, even for a moment, that she belonged to him. She had not come to Ashwood to build peace. She had come to destroy it from the inside, one quiet, careful step at a time, and so far, nothing had gone wrong. The proof came sooner than either Marcus or Ivy expected, though not in the way either of them had planned for. It began with a young wolf named Noah Bennett, barely 18, assigned to the Eastern Patrol route that bordered a stretch of forest most senior wolves avoided because it ran too close to the old boundary line with Ravenwood territory. Noah was not important enough in the pack's hierarchy to be trusted with sensitive matters, which was exactly why nobody thought twice about him walking that route alone on a quiet Tuesday night. He smelled the strangers before he saw them. Unfamiliar scent, sharp and foreign against the usual pine and earth of Ashwood land. He should have turned back immediately and reported it. That was the protocol every young wolf was trained to follow, but curiosity got the better of him, and he crept closer through the underbrush until he could see the small clearing where 3 wolves stood in human form, speaking in low voices. One of them was Elena. Noah froze, pressed flat against the trunk of an old oak, and listened as carefully as he could without giving away his position. "My father grows impatient," one of the strangers was saying. A man with a hard, angular face and eyes the color of wet slate. He wants to know when the border patrols will be thin enough for us to move. Soon, Elena answered, and her voice carried none of the warmth Noah had heard her use around the pack house. It was flat, businesslike, almost bored. Gabriel trusts me with scheduling now. Give me 2 more weeks and I'll have the eastern route left completely unguarded on the night of the full moon gathering, when the rest of the pack will be occupied with the ceremony. And the beta? He's been asking questions. Marcus suspects something, but he has no proof. Even if he did, Gabriel won't act on suspicion alone. Not against me. Not yet. A faint, cold amusement crept into her voice. He needs to believe in this alliance too badly to let himself see the truth. Your father wants confirmation that Ashwood's stores will be vulnerable before he commits any wolves to the crossing. Tell him it's already done, Elena said. I redirected enough of their winter supplies weeks ago. By the time the frost sets in, they'll be desperate, distracted, and weak. That's when you move. Noah's blood ran cold. He understood, in that moment, that he was witnessing something far larger and far more dangerous than a simple border dispute. This was betrayal at the highest level, planned and executed by the one person in the pack everyone had been told to trust completely. He waited until the strangers melted back into the trees and Elena turned to walk back toward the pack house before he allowed himself to move, and even then he was careful, staying low, staying silent, his heart hammering so loudly in his chest he was certain it would give him away. He did not go to Gabriel. He knew, even at 18, that an alpha blinded by loyalty to his Luna would not easily accept the word of a junior patrol wolf against her. Instead, he sought out the 2 people in the pack he had heard, through quiet rumors among the younger wolves, were already asking careful questions about Elena. He found Ivy first, in the medical house, sorting supplies by lamplight. I need to speak with you, Noah said, his voice unsteady, and with Marcus, somewhere private, tonight. Ivy took one look at his face and set down what she was holding immediately. What did you see? They gathered in Ivy's small office behind the medical house an hour later, the 3 of them speaking in hushed voices, even though the walls were thick enough to keep their conversation contained. Noah recounted everything he had heard, every word he could remember, and by the time he finished, Marcus's expression had gone hard and still, in a way Ivy had never seen before. She's planning an attack, Marcus said quietly, during the full moon gathering. That's in 11 days, Ivy said. She said 2 weeks in the conversation you overheard, Marcus said to Noah. Are you certain about the timing? I'm certain, Noah said. I wrote it down as soon as I got back to my quarters, everything I could remember, word for word. He produced a folded piece of paper from his jacket, and Marcus took it, scanning the hurried handwriting with a grim expression. This isn't enough on its own, Marcus said finally, though the frustration in his voice suggested he wished it were. Gabriel needs more than the word of a young patrol wolf repeating a conversation he overheard in the dark. Elena will deny everything, and without a stronger case, he'll believe her over us. Then we build a stronger case, Ivy said, echoing the resolve she had voiced to Marcus weeks earlier. We have 11 days. That has to be enough. What followed was a careful, quiet campaign of investigation, conducted entirely outside Elena's awareness. Marcus re-examined every discrepancy in the pack's records with new eyes, cross-referencing dates and signatures, building a timeline that showed exactly how the redirected supplies lined up with increasingly vulnerable gaps in the pack's defenses. Ivy began discreetly checking in with pack members who had been reassigned to distant outposts under Elena's gentle suggestions, learning that nearly every one of them had once been someone Gabriel relied on for honest counsel, wolves whose loyalty could not be easily bought or manipulated. Removing them from the pack house had not been coincidence. It had been strategy. Noah, meanwhile, quietly volunteered for additional patrol shifts along the eastern route, watching for any sign of the strangers returning, memorizing their scents so he would recognize them again if their paths crossed. It was dangerous work, all of it, and each of them understood the risk. If Elena discovered what they were doing before they had gathered enough evidence, she would have every opportunity to either silence their suspicions permanently or accelerate her plans before anyone could stop her. 6 days into their investigation, Marcus finally found the piece of evidence that would prove decisive. Buried in the pack's communication records, in a file Elena had access to but likely believed nobody else would think to check, was a series of messages sent to an unregistered number over the past several weeks. The messages had been deleted from the primary system, but Marcus, who had spent years understanding the pack's outdated record-keeping software far better than anyone gave him credit for, managed to recover fragments of the deleted data. The fragments were incomplete, but they were damning. References to supply routes, references to patrol schedules, a single line that read, chillingly, "My father's patience is not infinite, and I would advise against testing it further." "This is it," Marcus said, staring at the screen with a mixture of vindication and heartbreak. Whatever hope he had quietly carried that Elena might be innocent, that the pack's suspicions might somehow be wrong, died completely in that moment. "This is enough." "Enough to convince Gabriel?" Ivy asked. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. "It has to be." They decided to approach Gabriel together, the three of them, rather than risk Elena discovering their investigation and moving to protect herself before they could present their case. They chose a morning when Elena was occupied elsewhere in the territory, overseeing preparations for the upcoming gathering, and gathered in Gabriel's study with the evidence laid out carefully between them. Gabriel listened in silence as Marcus explained the financial discrepancies, as Ivy described the pattern of reassignments that had systematically removed his most trusted advisors from his side, as Noah, nervous but steady, recounted the conversation he had overheard in the forest almost word for word. When Marcus finally showed him the recovered message fragments, Gabriel went very still, staring at the screen for a long time without speaking. "This could be misinterpreted," he said finally, though his voice lacked the conviction it had carried in every previous conversation about Elena. "There could be an explanation." "Gabriel," Ivy said gently but firmly, "I know how hard this is to hear. I know what you hoped this marriage would mean, for you and for both packs. But we didn't come to you with rumors or feelings this time. We came with proof." Gabriel closed his eyes, and for a moment he looked older than his years, carrying the weight of a betrayal he had refused to see coming, even as everyone around him tried to warn him. "The full moon gathering is in 5 days," he said finally, opening his eyes, and something had changed in them, a hardness that had not been there before. "If what you're telling me is true, that's when she plans to leave us exposed." "That's what we believe," Marcus confirmed. "Then we're not going to let that happen." Gabriel stood, and though his voice shook slightly with the effort of accepting what he had spent months refusing to see, there was steel beneath the tremor. "But we're not going to confront her yet either. Not until we understand exactly what she's planning, and exactly who else might be involved. If we move too soon, we lose the chance to protect this pack properly." It was, Marcus realized with a mixture of relief and renewed grief, the first clear-headed decision Gabriel had made regarding Elena since the day she arrived. The alpha he remembered, the leader capable of setting aside his own wants for the good of his pack, had finally returned. "What do you need from us?" Ivy asked. Gabriel looked at each of them in turn, at Marcus, who had questioned Elena from the very beginning, at Ivy, who had trusted her instincts even when nobody else would listen, at Noah, barely more than a boy, who had risked everything to bring the truth forward. "I need you to help me make sure that when the moment comes," Gabriel said quietly, "we're the ones who are ready, not her." Outside the study window, the sky had begun to darken with the promise of an early evening storm, clouds gathering thick and heavy over the tree line, where, 5 days from now, Ashwood's fate would be decided one way or another. None of them could yet know exactly how the coming days would unfold, how close the pack would come to losing everything, or how unexpected the source of their salvation would ultimately prove to be. But for the first time since Elena Hartley had walked into their territory with a smile that hid every intention beneath it, the pack finally had the truth on its side. And truth, Marcus reminded himself as he left the study that evening, had a way of changing everything once it was finally allowed to surface. The next 5 days felt longer than any Marcus had lived through in years. Gabriel made the decision, difficult as it was, to continue behaving normally around Elena, to give no sign that her betrayal had been uncovered. It was, he explained to the small circle of people he now trusted completely, the only way to ensure they understood the full scope of her plan before acting against her. If she suspected they knew, she would either flee immediately or accelerate whatever backup plan her father had surely prepared in case things went wrong. For Gabriel, maintaining that composure meant sitting across from his wife at meals, listening to her discuss preparations for the full moon gathering with the same warm, easy tone she always used, and saying nothing about the ache that settled deeper into his chest with every word she spoke. He had loved her, or had believed himself capable of loving her, or had, at the very least, allowed himself to hope that something real might grow between them given enough time. Watching her now, knowing what he knew, felt like watching a stranger wear his wife's face. "You're quiet tonight," Elena observed one evening, studying him across the table with an expression that might have been genuine concern had he not known better. "Just thinking about the gathering," Gabriel said, keeping his voice even. "There's a lot to prepare." "You've done this every year," she said, smiling. "I'm sure it will go smoothly." He forced himself to smile back, and the effort of it felt like carrying a weight he had not trained for. While Gabriel maintained his careful performance, Marcus, Ivy, and Noah worked to understand exactly what Elena's plan required and how they might turn her own strategy against her. Marcus re-examined the patrol schedules Elena had been quietly revising over the past several weeks, and the pattern that emerged confirmed everything Noah had overheard. The eastern route, the same route that bordered the old boundary with Ravenwood territory, had been steadily reduced in coverage, with the most experienced wolves reassigned elsewhere under reasonable-sounding justifications. By the night of the gathering, the route would be left almost entirely unguarded, with only a handful of junior wolves stationed there, most of them too inexperienced to properly respond to an organized incursion. "She's been thorough," Marcus admitted grimly, spreading the schedules across Ivy's office table. "If we hadn't found this in time, the eastern route would have been wide open." "So we don't leave it open," Ivy said. "We just make it look like we have." It was Ivy's idea, ultimately, that formed the foundation of their counterplan. Rather than restoring full patrol coverage to the eastern route, which would almost certainly alert Elena that her scheme had been discovered, they would allow the route to appear exactly as vulnerable as she had arranged for it to be, while secretly positioning their most capable wolves nearby, hidden and ready to respond the moment Ravenwood's forces attempted to cross. Gabriel approved the plan, though not without reservations. If anything goes wrong, if they suspect the trap before they're fully committed, we could end up facing a stronger force than we're prepared for. That risk exists no matter what we do, Marcus pointed out. At least this way, we choose the terms. They spent the following days in careful, quiet preparation, selecting wolves they trusted absolutely, ensuring word of the plan spread no further than absolutely necessary. Noah, despite his youth, insisted on being part of the defense, and though Gabriel hesitated at first, the boy's steady composure and first-hand knowledge of the eastern route eventually won him a place among the hidden defenders. Elena, for her part, appeared to notice nothing unusual. She continued preparing for the gathering with the same meticulous attention she had shown for every pack event since her arrival, overseeing decorations and ceremonial arrangements, greeting pack members with warm words and easy smiles. If she felt any suspicion that her plans had been compromised, she gave no outward sign of it. But on the third night of their preparations, Ivy noticed something that gave her pause. She had gone to check on medical supplies stored near the eastern edge of the territory, close to where their hidden defenders would eventually position themselves. and as she moved quietly through the trees under the cover of darkness, she caught sight of Elena standing alone in a small clearing, speaking quietly on a phone. Ivy pressed herself against the trunk of a tree and listened, careful to keep her breathing controlled and silent. "Everything is proceeding as planned," Elena was saying, her voice low. "2 more days. The gathering will provide more than enough distraction." A pause, as though listening to a response on the other end. "No, there's no reason for concern. Gabriel suspects nothing. He's exactly where I need him to be." Ivy's chest tightened with a mixture of relief and dread. Relief, because it confirmed Elena still believed her plan remained a secret, which meant their counter-strategy still had a chance of succeeding. Dread, because hearing the casual cruelty in Elena's voice as she discussed manipulating her own husband made the full weight of the betrayal land freshly, even after everything Ivy already knew. She waited until Elena finished her call and disappeared back toward the pack house before allowing herself to move, and she reported what she had overheard to Marcus and Gabriel the following morning. "At least we know the plan still holds," Marcus said. "She has no idea we're prepared for her." Gabriel said nothing for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, quietly, he asked, "Did she sound happy when she spoke about deceiving me?" Ivy hesitated, unwilling to add to his pain, but she had never been the kind of person who believed comfortable lies served anyone well. "She sounded satisfied," Ivy admitted, like everything was proceeding exactly as she wanted. Gabriel absorbed this in silence, and when he finally spoke again, his voice carried a new resolve. "Then let's make sure it doesn't." The day of the gathering arrived cold and clear, the sky stretching wide and cloudless above Ashwood territory, as pack members began arriving from the outlying homes and outposts, gathering in the central clearing for the ceremony that marked every full moon. Children ran between the adults, laughing and chasing each other, oblivious to the tension that hummed beneath the surface of the celebration for those who knew what was coming. Elena moved through the gathering with practiced grace, greeting pack members, overseeing the final preparations, occasionally catching Gabriel's eye across the clearing and offering him a warm smile that he returned with effort. Marcus watched the exchange from a distance, his jaw tight, thinking of everything that smile concealed. As the sun began to set and the ceremony's opening rituals commenced, Marcus, Noah, and a carefully selected group of the pack's most capable wolves slipped quietly away from the gathering, making their way toward the eastern route under the cover of the gathering crowd's noise and movement. They positioned themselves in the dense forest bordering the old boundary line, hidden but alert, watching the tree line for any sign of movement. The gathering continued behind them, oblivious, the sound of ceremonial chanting and drumming carrying faintly through the trees as darkness fully settled over the territory and the full moon began its slow climb into the sky. For nearly 2 hours, nothing happened. Marcus began to wonder, with a mixture of hope and unease, whether their preparations had been for nothing, whether Elena's plan had somehow changed or been delayed. Beside him, Noah remained perfectly still, his young face set with a concentration that belied his age. Then, just as the moon reached its highest point, Noah's head snapped up, his nostrils flaring. "They're here," he whispered. Marcus followed his gaze toward the tree line, and in the pale moonlight, he began to make out shapes moving through the forest, dozens of wolves approaching the border in careful, coordinated silence. Ravenwood had come, exactly as Elena had promised her father they would, expecting to find the eastern route exactly as undefended as she had arranged. Marcus raised his hand, signaling his wolves to hold their position, to wait until the invading force had fully committed to the crossing before revealing themselves. His heart hammered in his chest, not with fear exactly, but with the electric tension of a plan finally reaching its critical moment. A moment that would determine whether Ashwood emerged from this night stronger than ever or shattered beyond repair. The invading wolves crossed the boundary line, moving with the confidence of a force that believed itself unseen, and Marcus watched them advance deeper into Ashwood territory, closer to the position where his own wolves waited in silence, closer to the moment when everything they had prepared for would finally be put to the test. Marcus let the invading wolves advance until they were well past the boundary line, deep enough into Ashwood territory that retreat would no longer be a simple option. He counted their numbers as they moved, nearly 30 wolves, more than he had expected, more than the pack's usual patrol strength could have handled if this had truly been the undefended route Elena had promised them. He waited until the lead wolves, a group of 5 moving ahead of the main force as scouts, came within a stone's throw of his hidden position. Then he gave the signal. The forest erupted with movement as Ashwood's defenders emerged from their hiding places, cutting off the invading force's path forward and, more importantly, their path back toward the boundary line. Shouts and snarls filled the night air as the two groups collided, though Gabriel had given strict instructions before the operation began. This was to be a defense, not a slaughter. Their goal was to repel the invasion and capture enough of Ravenwood's wolves to prove, beyond any doubt, exactly what Elena had orchestrated. Killing accomplished nothing except deepening a conflict they were trying to end for good. Marcus fought at the front of his group, using his size and experience to force back wolves twice his weight, careful to disable rather than seriously harm whenever possible. Around him, his fellow defenders did the same, their coordinated defense clearly catching Ravenwood's forces off guard. The invaders had expected an easy crossing into undefended territory, not a prepared and disciplined resistance waiting for them in the dark. Noah proved himself that night in ways that surprised even Marcus. Despite his youth, he moved through the chaos with a clear head, staying close to Marcus's side, watching his back, calling out warnings when he spotted invaders trying to flank their position. At one point, he tackled a much larger wolf that had broken through the line and was moving toward a group of younger Ashwood defenders who had gotten separated in the confusion, buying them precious seconds to regroup. The battle, if it could be called that, lasted barely 20 minutes before Ravenwood's forces, realizing they had walked into a prepared trap rather than the vulnerability they expected, began a chaotic retreat. Marcus's wolves pursued only far enough to ensure the invaders truly withdrew, capturing 3 wolves who had been cut off from the retreat, including the sharp-faced man Noah had overheard speaking with Elena in the forest weeks earlier. As the sounds of battle faded and the last of the retreating wolves disappeared back across the boundary line, Marcus allowed himself a single breath of relief before turning his attention to the aftermath. His wolves had sustained injuries, some serious, but nobody among Ashwood's defenders had died. It was more than he had dared hope for, given how close they had come to losing everything through Elena's careful sabotage. They brought the captured wolves back to the pack house under heavy guard, arriving just as the ceremony in the central clearing was reaching its final moments. Pack members turned in confusion and alarm as Marcus's group emerged from the tree line, bloodied and battle-worn, escorting 3 restrained prisoners into the heart of the gathering. The music and chanting died away instantly. Elena, standing near the ceremonial fire beside Gabriel, went pale as her eyes fixed on the prisoners, and for the first time since her arrival at Ashwood, her composure finally, visibly cracked. "What is the meaning of this?" she demanded, her voice sharp, though Marcus could hear the tremor of panic underneath it. "Who authorized an attack on our own border?" "We didn't attack anyone," Gabriel said, his voice carrying clearly across the suddenly silent clearing. "We defended our territory against an invasion your father sent, on a night and along a route you personally arranged to leave undefended." The color drained further from Elena's face. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't," Gabriel said, and the single word carried more weight than Marcus had ever heard from his friend. "We have the redirected supply records. We have the recovered messages between you and your father's contacts. We have a witness who overheard you planning this attack in person, weeks ago. And now," he gestured toward the captured wolves, We have proof standing right here that everything we uncovered was true." The gathered pack members began to murmur, shock and anger rippling through the crowd as the full weight of what had happened settled over them. Elena had been their Luna for 3 months. She had eaten at their tables, tended to their children's questions, stood beside their alpha, and promised peace between 2 ancient enemies. And the entire time, she had been quietly working to destroy everything they had built. "Gabriel," Elena said, her voice softening, shifting toward the pleading tone she had used so effectively before. "You have to understand, I didn't have a choice." "My father, your father sent you here as a weapon," Gabriel cut in, "and you used every part of yourself to make sure that weapon worked exactly as intended. You didn't have to choice to come here, maybe, but you had every choice in how you behaved once you arrived. You chose to lie to me every single day for 3 months. You chose to isolate the people I trusted most, to weaken this pack from the inside so your father's forces could finish the job tonight. Nobody forced you to do any of that with the skill and precision you showed." Elena had no answer for that. She stood in the firelight, surrounded by a pack that had once, briefly, believed in the promise she represented, and said nothing at all, because there was nothing left to say that would undo what had already been exposed. It was Ivy who finally stepped forward from the crowd, her voice steady despite the tension crackling through the clearing. "The question now isn't what she intended," Ivy said. "It's what we do with what we know." Gabriel nodded slowly, and when he spoke again, his voice had settled into the calm, deliberate tone of a leader making a decision he had clearly already been considering. "Elena Hartley," he said formally, "you are stripped of your title as Luna of this pack, effective immediately. You will be held under guard until the Pack Council can determine the appropriate response to your actions, and to the actions of the wolves who crossed our border tonight, under your direction." 2 of Gabriel's most trusted wolves stepped forward to escort Elena away from the clearing, and as she was led past Marcus and Ivy, she paused just long enough to look each of them in the eye. "You think this is over," she said quietly, her voice devoid of the warmth she had used so effectively for 3 months. "My father won't accept this failure quietly. This was only the beginning." "Maybe," Marcus said evenly, meeting her gaze without flinching. "But whatever comes next, we'll face it as a pack that knows exactly who its enemies are. That's more than we had 3 months ago." Elena said nothing more as she was led away, and the clearing remained heavy with silence long after she disappeared from view. The pack members left to process the enormity of what had nearly happened, and how close they had come to losing everything, without ever fully understanding why. Gabriel remained standing near the ceremonial fire for a long moment after the guards escorted Elena away, staring into the flames with an expression Marcus recognized from the darkest days of his own grief, years earlier, when he had first taken on the responsibilities of leadership far too young. It was the look of someone confronting the full weight of a mistake, understanding exactly how much that mistake could have cost, and beginning, slowly, to search for a way forward from the wreckage. "I should have listened to you both sooner," Gabriel said finally, turning to face Marcus and Ivy. "I let my hope for peace blind me to what was standing right in front of me." "You listened when it mattered most," Ivy said gently. "That's what saved us tonight." Gabriel managed a tired, grateful smile, though the exhaustion of the past months and the pain of a betrayal he was only beginning to fully process remained etched clearly across his face. Around them, the pack slowly began to stir back to life, wolves checking on the wounded, comforting frightened children, beginning the long process of understanding what their community had just survived. The captured wolves were secured for questioning, the pack's defenses reinforced along every border in case Adrian Cross attempted a second strike in retaliation for tonight's failure. And as the moon continued its slow arc across the clear night sky, Ashwood Pack began the difficult work of rebuilding, not just its physical defenses, but the trust that had been so carefully, deliberately shattered by the very person they had welcomed as their protector. None of them yet knew how Adrian Cross would respond to his daughter's failure, or what the coming weeks would demand of a pack still reeling from betrayal. But for the first time in months, Ashwood faced its uncertain future with clear eyes and united purpose. And that, Marcus thought as he finally allowed himself to rest, was worth more than any fragile peace Elena Hartley had ever promised them. The three captured wolves were questioned separately over the following 2 days, kept in isolated holding rooms beneath the pack house where Ashwood had, over generations, developed careful protocols for handling exactly this kind of situation. Gabriel insisted on conducting the interrogations himself, alongside Marcus, determined to understand the full scope of what his pack now faced. The sharp-faced man Noah had identified, whose name turned out to be Silas, proved the most forthcoming, though not out of any loyalty to Ashwood. He simply seemed to have no particular loyalty to Adrian Cross either, and once it became clear that his cooperation might earn him better treatment than his companions, he spoke freely. Adrian has been planning this for over a year, Silas admitted, sitting across from Gabriel and Marcus in the dim holding room, his hands bound but his posture relaxed, almost bored. The marriage alliance was never about peace. It was about placing someone inside your walls who could dismantle your defenses without anyone realizing what was happening until it was too late. And Elena agreed to this, Gabriel said, his voice carefully controlled. Silas gave a short, humorless laugh. Agreed isn't quite the right word. Elena didn't have much choice in the matter. Adrian doesn't raise his children to have choices. He raises them to be useful. Marcus exchanged a glance with Gabriel, something uncomfortable settling in the room. Explain. Elena's mother tried to leave Ravenwood territory years ago when Elena was still young, Silas continued. Adrian made an example of the attempt. After that, Elena understood very clearly what happened to people in his pack who failed to serve his purposes or who tried to escape them. When he told her she would marry Gabriel Voss and dismantle Ashwood's defenses from within, refusing was never really an option she believed she had. The room fell silent for a long moment. Gabriel's expression had shifted from cold anger into something more complicated, something Marcus recognized as the beginning of an unwelcome, unwanted sympathy. That doesn't excuse what she did, Marcus said finally, though his voice had lost some of its earlier hardness. No, Silas agreed easily. It doesn't. I'm not asking you to forgive her. I'm just telling you the truth, because it seems like the kind of thing you'd want to know before you decide what to do with her. They learned more from the other 2 captured wolves over the following day, details that painted an increasingly clear picture of Adrian Cross's methods, of a leadership built on fear rather than loyalty, of a pack where failure carried consequences severe enough that even wolves who disagreed with his plans rarely found the courage to resist them openly. Gabriel sat with this information for a long time after the interrogations concluded, alone in his study, the weight of an impossible decision settling over him. Elena had betrayed his pack, had endangered every wolf under his protection, had lied to him with a skill that still made his chest ache when he thought about it too directly. And yet the picture emerging of her circumstances complicated the simple narrative of villainy he had been holding on to since the night of the attack. He called Ivy and Marcus to his study that evening, along with Elena herself, brought up from the holding cell where she had been kept since the night of the gathering. She looked different than she had during her months as Ashwood's Luna, the polish and confidence stripped away, replaced by something more exhausted and, Ivy noted with some surprise, more genuine than anything Elena had shown the pack before. We spoke with the wolves who came here to help your father's forces, Gabriel said, watching her carefully. They told us about your mother. Something flickered across Elena's face, quick and painful, gone almost before Ivy could fully register it. Then you understand why I did what I did. I understand the pressure you were under, Gabriel said carefully. I don't understand why you never once, in 3 months, considered telling me the truth. If your father was forcing your hand, I could have helped you. This pack could have protected you from him. Elena laughed, a short, bitter sound with no humor in it at all. You have no idea what my father is capable of. Telling you the truth would have meant risking everything, not just for me, but for anyone I cared about who remained within his reach. Trust isn't a luxury I've ever been able to afford, Gabriel, not with him watching everything I do. You could have trusted us anyway, Marcus said quietly. Instead, you chose to let us find out on our own, after nearly losing this pack because of choices you made. Elena had no response to that, and the silence stretched uncomfortably between them until Gabriel finally spoke again, his voice heavy with the weight of the decision he had clearly been wrestling with since the interrogations concluded. I'm not going to pretend what you did doesn't deserve serious consequences, he said. You endangered every life in this pack, including children who trusted you, including elders who welcomed you as family. That can't simply be forgiven because your circumstances were difficult. Many people face difficult circumstances and choose differently than you did. I know, Elena said quietly, and for the first time since her arrival at Ashwood, Ivy believed she was hearing something completely unguarded. But I also understand, Gabriel continued, that punishing you severely enough to satisfy the pack's anger won't actually solve the larger problem, which is your father, and what he intends to do next, now that his plan has failed. If we execute you, or exile you into his hands, we lose whatever leverage your knowledge of his operations might give us. And, if we simply release you, we send a message to every enemy watching us that Ashwood can be infiltrated and betrayed without meaningful consequence. What are you proposing? Ivy asked. Gabriel was quiet for a long moment before answering. Elena remains here, under guard, but not as a prisoner in the traditional sense. She provides everything she knows about her father's forces, his territory, his plans for retaliation. In exchange, we offer her something she's apparently never had the chance to consider before: genuine protection from him, and the opportunity to build a different life, far from his control. Marcus stared at his friend, clearly startled by the proposal. You want to protect the person who nearly destroyed us? I want to use every resource available to protect this pack from what's coming next, Gabriel corrected. Adrian Cross isn't going to accept tonight's failure quietly. Silas confirmed as much himself. We need every advantage we can get before he decides how to retaliate, and Elena's knowledge of his operations is an advantage we would be foolish to throw away out of anger, however justified that anger might be. It was, Ivy thought, watching the exchange unfold, exactly the kind of decision that separated a good leader from a merely angry one. Gabriel had every reason to want Elena punished as severely as possible. Instead, he was choosing the path most likely to protect his pack in the long run, even if it meant extending a measure of grace to someone who had betrayed his trust in the most personal way imaginable. Elena, for her part, looked at Gabriel with an expression Ivy couldn't quite read, somewhere between disbelief and something that might, given time, become gratitude. Why would you offer me that? She asked quietly. After everything I did to you. Because this pack has spent generations losing wolves to conflicts that could have been resolved through something other than more violence, Gabriel said. I'm tired of choosing punishment over solutions, even when punishment feels justified. If there's a way forward that keeps my people safe without requiring more bloodshed than necessary, I intend to take it. The decision did not sit easily with everyone in the pack when word of it eventually spread. Some wolves, still furious over the danger Elena had brought to their doorstep, argued for harsher consequences. Others, understanding the strategic value of her cooperation, accepted Gabriel's reasoning even if they remained wary of trusting her fully. Marcus found himself somewhere in between, unable to fully forgive what Elena had done, but recognizing the wisdom in Gabriel's approach, even as his own instincts still urged caution. What none of them yet knew was how quickly Adrian Cross would respond to his daughter's failure, or how much more dangerous the coming conflict would become once he realized his carefully constructed plan had not only failed, but had left his own daughter in the hands of the enemy he had sent her to destroy. The message from Adrian Cross arrived 4 days later, delivered not through any diplomatic channel, but pinned to the body of a messenger wolf, found unconscious at the edge of Ashwood's northern boundary, close enough to the border that the delivery itself felt like a deliberate provocation. The message was short and unambiguous. Return my daughter within 1 week, along with the 3 wolves you captured, or Ashwood territory will learn exactly what happens to packs that interfere with Ravenwood's business. Gabriel called an emergency council meeting the moment the message reached him, gathering his most trusted advisors, including Marcus, Ivy, and, somewhat controversially, Elena herself, whose knowledge of her father's methods had already proven valuable enough over the past few days that Gabriel insisted her presence in strategic discussions outweighed the discomfort some council members still felt about including her. "He won't wait the full week," Elena said, studying the message with a grim expression. "This is theater, meant to make it look like he's offering a reasonable ultimatum. In reality, he's already preparing his forces. The deadline is just cover, so that when he attacks, he can claim you refused a fair opportunity to resolve this peacefully." "How large a force can he mobilize?" Marcus asked. "Larger than what you faced during the gathering," Elena said. "That was a small strike team, meant to slip in quietly and weaken your defenses without drawing full attention. If he's decided to move openly now, he'll bring everything he has. Ravenwood's territory is larger than Ashwood's. His numbers are significant." The council fell into tense discussion, weighing options that ranged from attempting diplomatic negotiation to preparing for full defensive war. Gabriel listened to every argument carefully before finally speaking. "We're not returning Elena to him," he said firmly. "Whatever consequences that decision brings, I won't hand someone back into circumstances we now understand to be genuinely dangerous, regardless of what she did to get here." Several council members exchanged uneasy glances at this, but nobody argued the point directly, aware of how much Elena's cooperation had already contributed to their understanding of the threat they faced. "Then we need allies," Ivy said. "Ashwood can't withstand a full-scale attack from Ravenwood's entire force alone, not if their numbers are as significant as Elena describes." Gabriel nodded slowly. This was the part of the plan that troubled him most, because Ashwood's relationships with neighboring packs had grown thin over the years of quiet hostility with Ravenwood, most territories preferring to remain neutral rather than risk drawing Adrian Cross's attention onto themselves. "There's one pack that might be willing to help," Marcus said carefully. "Silverbrook territory. Their alpha, Daniel Foss, has had his own conflicts with Ravenwood in the past, disputes over hunting grounds that Adrian resolved through intimidation rather than negotiation. He might see value in weakening Cross's influence, even if he's shown no interest in our conflicts before now." "It's worth trying," Gabriel said. "Marcus, I want you to travel to Silverbrook personally, explain the situation, and make clear that whatever happens to Ashwood in the coming days won't stay contained to our territory alone. If Cross succeeds here, Silverbrook will likely be his next target for expansion." Marcus departed the following morning, taking Noah with him as additional support for the journey, leaving Gabriel, Ivy, and the rest of the Pack Council to focus on strengthening Ashwood's defenses in preparation for whatever Adrian Cross intended to do once his week-long deadline expired. The days that followed passed in a blur of urgent preparation. Every able-bodied wolf in the pack was called into service, training intensively under the guidance of Ashwood's most experienced fighters. Ivy worked tirelessly to ensure the medical house was fully stocked and prepared for potential casualties, drawing on knowledge passed down through generations of pack healers who had prepared for conflicts before her. Gabriel personally oversaw the reinforcement of every border position, determined not to repeat the vulnerability that had nearly cost them everything during the gathering. Elena, to the surprise of many in the pack, threw herself into the preparations with genuine dedication, sharing everything she knew about her father's tactical preferences, his favored strategies, the strengths and weaknesses of his most trusted commanders. She spent long hours with Gabriel and the council, mapping out likely approaches Ravenwood's forces might take, identifying weak points in Ashwood's current defenses that mirrored the vulnerabilities she had once been tasked with creating. "You know his methods better than anyone," Gabriel observed one evening, as they reviewed defensive positions late into the night. "This information could make the difference between us surviving this and losing everything." "I spent my whole life learning how he thinks," Elena said quietly. "I never imagined I'd use that knowledge to protect people from him instead of helping him hurt them." Gabriel studied her for a long moment, something complicated passing across his features. "Do you regret what you did before all of this?" Elena considered the question seriously before answering. "I regret that I didn't find a way to resist him sooner. I regret every day I spent lying to people who deserved better from me. But I don't regret being here now, trying to make it right, even if I know that doesn't undo the danger I put this pack in." It was not quite an apology, not in the traditional sense, but Gabriel found himself accepting it as something close enough, given everything he now understood about the impossible position she had been placed in from the very beginning of her life. Marcus returned from Silverbrook territory 3 days later, with news that brought a measure of relief to the increasingly tense pack house. Alpha Daniel Foss had agreed to send support, not out of any particular loyalty to Ashwood, but out of clear self-interest, recognizing that an unchecked Ravenwood pack would eventually threaten his own territory's stability, regardless of how this particular conflict resolved. "He's sending 40 wolves," Marcus reported to the assembled council. "They'll arrive within 2 days, well before Cross's deadline expires." The news lifted spirits across the pack house, though Gabriel remained cautiously aware that even with Silverbrook's support, they would still be facing a significant threat. Adrian Cross had spent years building a pack defined by discipline and fear, and Elena's assessment of his forces suggested numbers that would still test Ashwood's combined defenses severely. As the deadline approached, the pack settled into a strange, tense rhythm of preparation and waiting, every wolf aware that the coming confrontation would likely determine not just Ashwood's immediate safety, but the broader balance of power across the region for years to come. Gabriel found himself, in quiet moments between preparations, reflecting on how dramatically everything had changed since the morning Elena Hartley first arrived at his territory, in a car with tinted windows, wearing a smile that had concealed an entire war waiting to unfold. Whatever came next, he understood now with a clarity that had been sorely lacking during those first hopeful months of his marriage, would require every ounce of strength, unity, and hard-earned wisdom his pack could muster. The peace he had once hoped Elena's arrival might bring had proven to be an illusion, but perhaps he allowed himself to hope as the final day before Cross's deadline dawned clear and cold over Ashwood territory, something more genuine and more lasting might yet emerge from the wreckage of that failed promise. Silverbrook's forces arrived exactly as promised, 40 disciplined wolves led personally by Alpha Daniel Foss, a broad-shouldered man with a weathered face and the careful, measured manner of someone who had survived more conflicts than he cared to count. He greeted Gabriel with a firm handshake and none of the ceremonial warmth that had characterized Elena's own arrival months earlier. "I'm not here out of friendship," Foss said plainly, as the two alphas walked together along Ashwood's northern border, inspecting the reinforced defensive positions. "Adrian Cross has been a thorn in every neighboring territory's side for years. If your pack falls, mine becomes his next target. I'd rather fight him here, on your ground, with your people beside mine, than face him alone on my own territory later." "I appreciate the honesty," Gabriel said, "and the help, whatever the reason behind it." Foss studied him for a moment, something like respect flickering across his weathered features. "I heard about what happened with your Luna. Most alphas in your position would have executed her the moment her betrayal came to light. Instead, you kept her close and used what she knows to prepare for exactly this moment. It seemed like the wiser choice," Gabriel said, "though I understand not everyone sees it that way." "Wisdom and popularity rarely travel together," Foss said, with the first hint of dry humor Gabriel had heard from him. "But results tend to earn respect eventually, whatever people think in the moment." The combined forces spent the following day finalizing their defensive strategy, integrating Silverbrook's wolves into Ashwood's existing positions along the borders most likely to face Adrian Cross's advance. Elena worked closely with both alphas throughout the planning, her detailed knowledge of Ravenwood's tactical preferences proving invaluable as they anticipated the various approaches Cross's forces might attempt. "He won't come through the eastern route again," Elena advised, studying the territorial map spread across the war table in Gabriel's study. "That failed once already, and my father doesn't repeat strategies that have already been exposed. He'll likely split his forces, sending a smaller group along a secondary route to draw your attention, while his main force attempts a direct approach through the central territory, where he'll expect your defenses to be thinnest after focusing so heavily on the border regions." "That matches what we saw from his previous tactics," Foss confirmed, studying the map with a thoughtful frown. "He favors misdirection. Always has." Gabriel nodded, absorbing the strategic assessment with the focused intensity of a leader determined not to be caught unprepared a second time. "Then we prepare for both possibilities. Marcus, I want you leading the response to any secondary incursion attempt, with enough wolves to handle a diversionary force without overcommitting our numbers. Foss, if you're willing, I'd like Silverbrook's wolves positioned to reinforce the central territory, where we expect the main assault to focus." Foss agreed readily, and the following hours were spent finalizing positions, ensuring every wolf understood their role in the coming confrontation. Ivy oversaw final preparations at the medical house, working alongside Silverbrook's own healer to ensure both packs' wounded could receive proper care regardless of which territory they called home. As evening fell on the final day before Cross's deadline expired, a tense quiet settled over Ashwood territory, the kind of stillness that precedes any significant storm. Gabriel walked the length of the central defensive line personally, checking in with wolves from both packs, offering words of encouragement and steady confidence, even as his own nerves remained tightly wound beneath his composed exterior. He found Elena near the edge of the training grounds, standing alone and watching the preparations with an expression that mixed anxiety with something that looked almost like hope. "You don't have to be out here," Gabriel said, approaching her carefully. "You could remain in the pack house, away from whatever comes tomorrow." "I want to help," Elena said, "not just with strategy. If it comes to fighting, I want to stand with this pack, not hide from what's coming." Gabriel studied her for a long moment. "Your father is bringing his forces here because of choices you made. Choices that started with a decision to deceive us. But everything you've done since we uncovered the truth has been in service of protecting this pack, even at real risk to yourself. That matters, Elena, more than I think you realize." "It doesn't erase what I did," she said quietly. "No," Gabriel agreed, "it doesn't. But it does mean something different than what came before. People aren't only defined by their worst choices, especially when those choices were made under circumstances as difficult as yours were. What you do now, in the aftermath, matters just as much." Elena looked at him with an expression Gabriel couldn't fully interpret, somewhere between gratitude and disbelief that he could offer her even this measure of understanding after everything that had happened. "Whatever happens tomorrow," she said finally, "thank you for giving me the chance to try to make this right." Gabriel nodded, and though the weight of the coming confrontation still pressed heavily on both of them, something had shifted subtly in the space between them, a fragile beginning of understanding that neither of them could yet fully name. The deadline arrived with the dawn, gray light spreading slowly across a sky heavy with clouds that threatened rain before the day was through. Every wolf across both territories' combined forces took their positions in tense, watchful silence, waiting for the first sign of Adrian Cross's approach. They did not have to wait long. By mid-morning, scouts positioned along the outer boundaries reported movement, a significant force approaching from the direction of Ravenwood territory, moving with the disciplined confidence of wolves who had trained under Adrian Cross's exacting standards for years. Marcus, positioned along the secondary route Elena had predicted, watched as a smaller group, exactly as she had anticipated, began moving toward the eastern boundary, clearly intended as a diversion from the larger threat building toward the central territory. Gabriel received the reports calmly, his earlier uncertainty replaced now by the steady focus of a leader fully committed to the defense of everything he had sworn to protect. He gave the order to hold positions, to let both forces fully commit to their approaches before revealing the true strength of Ashwood's prepared defenses. As the morning wore on and Adrian Cross's forces drew steadily closer to the heart of Ashwood territory, Gabriel found himself standing at the center of his combined defensive line, Elena beside him, Foss and his Silverbrook wolves positioned along the flanks, every piece of their careful preparation finally about to be tested against the full weight of the threat that had been building since the day Elena Hartley first arrived at his door with a smile that had concealed an entire storm waiting to break. Adrian Cross himself led the main force, a fact Elena confirmed the moment she caught his scent carried on the wind, still distinct even after years of distance and everything that had happened between them. "He's here personally," she said, her voice tight. "That means he's confident. He wouldn't risk himself unless he believed victory was certain." "Confidence isn't the same as certainty," Gabriel replied. "He doesn't know what we've prepared for him." The main force emerged from the tree line as the sun climbed toward its midday peak, easily double the size of the group that had attempted the failed border crossing weeks earlier. Adrian Cross walked at the front, a tall man whose resemblance to his daughter was unmistakable in the sharp lines of his face, though where Elena's features carried warmth even in careful calculation, his held nothing but cold, calculating purpose. He stopped a significant distance from Ashwood's defensive line, close enough to be heard clearly, far enough to maintain a tactical advantage should negotiations fail. "Gabriel Voss," Cross called out, his voice carrying easily across the open ground between them. "I gave you a simple choice. Return what belongs to me, and this conflict ends peacefully. Instead, you've chosen to stand against me with borrowed strength from Silverbrook." His eyes moved across the assembled defenders until they found Elena, standing beside Gabriel with her chin raised, despite the fear Gabriel could sense radiating from her. "And you've kept my daughter close, it seems, playing at loyalty to people who will never truly accept her, given what she's done." "Elena isn't a possession to be returned," Gabriel called back, his voice steady and clear. "She's chosen to stand with this pack, against the circumstances you forced upon her for years. That choice belongs to her, not to you." Cross's expression darkened. "You understand nothing about what belongs to whom in this world, Voss. But I suppose that ignorance won't matter much longer." He raised his hand, and his forces surged forward with the discipline of wolves trained for exactly this moment, closing the distance toward Ashwood's defensive line with terrifying speed. Gabriel gave the signal, and the combined forces of Ashwood and Silverbrook met the charge with equal ferocity, the two lines colliding in a chaos of movement and sound that filled the open ground between the tree lines. Marcus, positioned along the eastern approach, engaged the diversionary force exactly as planned, his wolves holding the smaller group's advance with disciplined efficiency, preventing them from circling around to reinforce the main assault. Noah fought alongside him again, more confident now than he had been during the first confrontation, his growing experience evident in the controlled precision of his movements. At the central line, Gabriel fought with a focused intensity born of everything the past months had cost him, every lie he had believed, every warning he had dismissed, every ounce of trust Adrian Cross's scheme had exploited. Foss and his Silverbrook wolves proved every bit as capable as their reputation suggested, their disciplined defense holding firm even as Cross's forces pressed with everything they had. The battle stretched on for what felt like hours, though in reality, barely 30 minutes had passed before the tide began to shift. Ashwood and Silverbrook's combined preparation, their careful anticipation of Cross's tactics, gave them an advantage his forces had not accounted for. Where Cross had expected the same disorganized, weakened defense his intelligence had promised him weeks earlier, he instead found a coordinated, prepared resistance that matched his numbers with superior strategy. Elena, despite Gabriel's initial hesitation about her direct involvement, fought fiercely alongside the defenders, her intimate knowledge of her father's forces allowing her to anticipate and counter attacks in ways that saved several Ashwood wolves from serious harm. When one of Cross's most trusted commanders broke through the line and moved directly toward Gabriel, clearly under orders to target Ashwood's Alpha specifically, it was Elena who intercepted him, her fighting skill honed through years of training in her father's demanding pack, holding him off long enough for Gabriel to regroup and finish the confrontation himself. Adrian Cross watched the battle turn against his forces with mounting fury, his carefully constructed plan unraveling in real time before his eyes. He had expected an easy victory, expected his daughter's sabotage to have left Ashwood crippled and vulnerable. Instead, he found himself facing a pack that had not only recovered from her betrayal, but had turned every piece of information she provided into a weapon against him. As his forces began to falter, retreating in increasing numbers toward the tree line, Cross made one final, desperate move, breaking from his position at the rear of his forces to advance directly toward Elena himself, his expression twisted with a rage that made even the surrounding chaos of battle seem to pause for a moment. "You would betray your own blood for these strangers," he snarled, closing the distance between them with terrifying speed. "I would betray you for anyone who deserved better than what you offered them," Elena replied, standing her ground despite the fear Gabriel could see clearly written across her features. "Everything I did for you was built on fear, not loyalty. That ends today." Cross lunged toward her, and for a heart-stopping moment, Gabriel feared he would reach her before anyone could intervene. But Marcus, having successfully repelled the diversionary force along the eastern route, arrived at exactly the right moment, cutting off Cross's advance and forcing him into a direct confrontation that gave Elena the space she needed to retreat safely behind the defensive line. The confrontation between Marcus and Adrian Cross was brief but decisive, Marcus's controlled discipline ultimately overwhelming Cross's rage-driven aggression. When Cross finally found himself restrained, his forces in full retreat around him, the fight seemed to drain out of him all at once, leaving only the cold, calculating fury of a man who understood, however unwillingly, that his plan had failed completely. "This isn't finished," Cross spat, as Ashwood wolves moved to secure him properly. "You think you've won something today, but you've only delayed the inevitable." "Maybe," Gabriel said, approaching slowly, his expression carrying none of the anger Cross clearly expected. "Or maybe you've simply lost the ability to control the outcome the way you always have before. Either way, your forces are defeated. Your daughter has chosen a different path than the one you forced on her, and whatever comes next, it won't be determined by fear the way everything in your territory has been for years." Cross said nothing more as he was led away under guard, and across the battlefield, the fighting gradually wound down as the last remnants of Ravenwood's forces either surrendered or fled back toward their own territory, their leader's capture effectively ending any organized resistance. The combined forces of Ashwood and Silverbrook had suffered injuries, some serious, but remarkably few losses given the scale of the confrontation they had just survived. As the chaos settled and the wounded were gathered for treatment, Gabriel found himself standing amid the aftermath, exhausted but alive, his pack intact, the threat that had loomed over them for months finally, decisively broken. Elena approached him slowly, her own injuries minor but visible, her expression uncertain as she took in the scene around them. "It's over," she said quietly, as though she could barely believe the words herself. "This part of it, yes," Gabriel said. "What comes next is still an open question, but we'll face it together, as a pack that finally understands exactly what it's protecting and exactly what it's willing to fight for." Around them, Ashwood and Silverbrook wolves began the long work of tending to the wounded, securing the captured prisoners, and processing the enormity of a battle that had tested everything both packs believed about strength, loyalty, and the true cost of the peace they had all been fighting to protect. In the weeks that followed the battle, Ashwood Territory settled into a period of careful recovery, the physical wounds of the conflict healing steadily under Ivy's dedicated care, while the deeper wounds, the ones left by months of betrayal and uncertainty, took considerably longer to mend. Adrian Cross remained held under guard while Gabriel, in consultation with Alpha Foss and representatives from several neighboring territories who had watched the conflict unfold with interest, worked to determine an appropriate resolution. Simply releasing him seemed certain to invite future conflict, but executing him risked turning Ravenwood's remaining wolves, many of whom had followed his orders out of fear rather than genuine loyalty, into a leaderless and potentially more dangerous threat. The solution, when it finally emerged, came through a combination of diplomatic pressure and Elena's own careful counsel. Ravenwood's Pack Council, many of whom had grown weary of Cross's fear-based leadership over the years, agreed to a transition of power, installing a new leadership structure under wolves who had quietly opposed Cross's methods for years but had lacked the standing to challenge him directly. Cross himself would remain exiled from any position of authority, permanently barred from Ravenwood Territory, his influence over the pack he had once ruled through intimidation finally and completely broken. "It's not the ending I would have imagined for him," Elena admitted to Gabriel, as they reviewed the final terms of the agreement together in his study, weeks after the battle had concluded. "Part of me expected this would end with him dead, or with me dead, one outcome or the other. I never imagined something this measured." "Measured outcomes tend to last longer than dramatic ones," Gabriel said. "Your father built his power on fear and violence. Answering that with more of the same would only prove his methods were the only language this conflict understood. I'd rather prove him wrong." Elena studied him for a long moment, something soft and unguarded in her expression that had become increasingly common in the weeks since the battle. "You're a better person than most alphas I've ever encountered, Gabriel Voss. I hope you know that. I made a terrible mistake trusting the wrong things for the wrong reasons," Gabriel said honestly. "It nearly cost this pack everything. Whatever wisdom I've shown since then has come from learning that lesson the hard way." Their relationship, in the months following the conflict, evolved into something neither of them had expected when Elena first arrived at Ashwood Territory under such different circumstances. The forced formality of their arranged marriage gave way, slowly and carefully, to something built on the honesty that had been so painfully absent during those first months together. Gabriel found himself genuinely valuing Elena's counsel, not because circumstance demanded it, but because her insight, freed from the burden of deception, proved consistently thoughtful and sincere. Elena, for her part, discovered in Ashwood something she had never experienced in her father's territory, a community where honesty was rewarded rather than punished, where mistakes could be acknowledged and addressed rather than concealed out of fear. Not everyone in the pack fully embraced this evolving trust immediately. Some wolves, still carrying the memory of how close Elena's deception had brought them to disaster, remained cautious in their interactions with her, and Gabriel understood and respected their hesitation rather than demanding immediate forgiveness on Elena's behalf. Trust, he had learned through painful experience, could not be rushed or forced. It had to be earned, carefully and consistently, over time. Marcus remained one of the more guarded voices within the Pack Council, though even his skepticism gradually softened as Elena continued to prove herself through consistent, transparent action rather than mere words. When Ravenwood's Transitional Council reached out several months later, requesting Ashwood's assistance in establishing new trade agreements that would benefit both territories, it was Elena who helped negotiate terms that proved fair and mutually beneficial, using her intimate knowledge of Ravenwood's resources and needs to craft an agreement that satisfied both packs. "I still don't fully trust her," Marcus admitted to Ivy one evening, watching Elena work through the details of the trade agreement with a focused dedication that had become characteristic of her role within the pack. But I trust what she's building now. That has to count for something. It counts for a great deal, Ivy said. Trust rebuilt through consistent honesty is often stronger than trust that was never tested at all. Elena understands now, in a way she never did before, exactly what genuine loyalty costs and exactly what it's worth. Noah, too, found his own place within the pack, transformed by the events of the past months. His courage during the initial discovery of Elena's plot, and his steady bravery during both confrontations with Ravenwood's forces, had earned him a reputation within Ashwood that far exceeded his years. Gabriel personally recommended him for advanced training, recognizing in the young wolf a natural aptitude for leadership that would serve the pack well in years to come. As the seasons turned and Ashwood territory settled into a new, hard-earned stability, the pack found itself, somewhat unexpectedly, stronger and more united than it had been in generations. The crisis that had nearly destroyed them had, in its painful aftermath, forged bonds of trust and cooperation between Ashwood and Silverbrook that neither pack could have anticipated before the conflict began. Alpha Foss, initially motivated purely by self-interest, found himself genuinely valuing the alliance that had grown between the two territories. An alliance built not on the fragile promises of arranged marriage, but on the tested reliability of shared struggle and mutual respect. Gabriel, reflecting on everything the pack had endured, found himself thinking often about the lessons the entire experience had taught him, about leadership, about trust, and about the difference between the appearance of peace and the harder, more genuine work required to build something that could actually last. I spent so long wanting an easy end to the conflict with Ravenwood, he admitted to Ivy one evening, as the two of them reviewed the pack's steadily improving fortunes. I let that desire blind me to the warnings everyone around me kept trying to offer. I won't make that mistake again. None of us could have predicted exactly how things would unfold, Ivy said gently. But you learned from it, and more importantly, you led this pack through it with wisdom that ultimately made us stronger than we were before. That's what matters most, in the end. Gabriel nodded slowly, watching through his study window as pack members went about their evening routines across the territory below, children playing near the training grounds, wolves returning from patrol duties, the ordinary rhythms of a community that had, against significant odds, survived a betrayal severe enough to have destroyed lesser packs entirely. Whatever challenges still lay ahead, and Gabriel understood well enough that no peace, however hard won, remained entirely free from future difficulty, Ashwood now faced its future with a foundation of hard-earned wisdom that no arranged marriage or false promise of alliance could ever have provided. They had learned, through painful experience, exactly what genuine trust required, and exactly how much stronger a pack could become once that trust was built on truth rather than convenient illusion. A full year passed before Ashwood territory held its next major gathering under the full moon, and this time, the celebration carried none of the uncertain tension that had shadowed the previous year's ceremony. The pack gathered in the same central clearing where Elena's betrayal had first been exposed, but the mood tonight was entirely different, lighter, filled with the genuine warmth of a community that had weathered its greatest test and emerged stronger for having survived it. Gabriel stood near the ceremonial fire, watching his pack celebrate with an ease he had not felt in years, when Ivy approached him quietly, a knowing smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "You look like a man with something on his mind," she observed. "I've been thinking about renewing the ceremony," Gabriel admitted. "Elena and I never had a real one, not truly. The first time was built on lies neither of us fully understood at the time. I want the pack to witness something honest this time, if she's willing." Ivy's smile widened. "I think she'd be more than willing." Gabriel found Elena near the edge of the gathering, speaking warmly with a group of younger pack members who had, over the past year, grown genuinely fond of her steady, thoughtful presence within the community. She caught his eye across the clearing and made her way toward him, the easy familiarity between them a testament to everything they had rebuilt together since that painful first year. "You look thoughtful tonight," she said, echoing Ivy's earlier observation. I've been thinking about what this pack witnessed a year ago in this very clearing, Gabriel said. The worst night either of us has ever lived through. I'd like to give them something different to remember, if you're willing. Elena studied him carefully, understanding beginning to dawn in her expression. What are you proposing? A new ceremony, Gabriel said. Not because tradition demands it, but because I want this pack, and you, and myself, to have a memory of this place that isn't tangled up with everything that went wrong the first time. I want to stand here and choose you honestly, knowing everything I know now, rather than the version of hope I was clinging to a year ago. Something bright and unguarded lit up Elena's expression, an emotion so different from the careful composure she had maintained during her first months at Ashwood that Gabriel found himself struck, once again, by how completely she had transformed since those difficult early days. I would like that very much, she said softly. Word spread quickly through the gathering, and by the time Gabriel and Elena stood together before the ceremonial fire, the entire pack had gathered around them, along with a delegation from Silverbrook territory who had traveled to join the celebration, and even a small group from Ravenwood's new leadership extended an invitation as a gesture of the genuine peace that had finally, truly taken hold between the two former rival packs. Marcus stood near the front of the gathering, watching the ceremony with an expression that mixed lingering caution with genuine warmth, the same complicated blend of feelings he had carried throughout the past year as he slowly, carefully, allowed himself to trust the woman who had once nearly cost them everything. When Gabriel caught his eye during the ceremony and offered a small, grateful nod, Marcus returned it fully, understanding without words the depth of gratitude his old friend felt for everyone who had helped guide the pack through its darkest hour. Noah stood beside Ivy, now formally recognized as one of Ashwood's most promising young leaders. His growth over the past year, a living testament to the courage he had first shown as a frightened 18-year-old wolf who had chosen to speak the truth rather than remain silent out of fear. Ivy watched him with quiet pride, remembering the terrified young man who had first brought them the evidence that changed everything, now standing tall and confident among wolves twice his age, who had come to respect his judgment completely. As the ceremony concluded and the pack erupted into genuine, joyful celebration, Gabriel found a quiet moment alone with Elena near the edge of the clearing, away from the noise and warmth of the gathering behind them. A year ago, standing in this exact spot, Elena said, looking out over the celebrating pack, I never imagined I would end up here, genuinely happy, surrounded by people who actually trust me. I spent so long believing that kind of belonging wasn't possible for someone like me. You earned this, Gabriel said simply. Every bit of trust this pack has extended to you over the past year, you earned through consistent, honest action. That's worth more than any inherited title or arranged alliance ever could be. Elena smiled, leaning into him slightly as they watched the celebration continue under the bright, clear light of the full moon. I used to think love and loyalty were things people manipulated each other into, tools to be used rather than things that could genuinely exist. This pack taught me otherwise. We taught each other, Gabriel corrected gently. I learned just as much from watching you rebuild yourself this past year as you learned from being welcomed into a community built on something more honest than fear. Across the clearing, Marcus approached Ivy, both of them watching the newly renewed alpha couple with expressions of quiet satisfaction. Do you remember? Marcus said, standing right here a year ago, certain that everything we'd built was about to fall apart? I remember, Ivy said. I also remember believing, even then, that we'd find our way through it, one way or another. This pack has never been defined by its easiest moments. It's been defined by how it responds to its hardest ones. Marcus nodded slowly, watching Noah laugh with a group of younger wolves nearby, watching Gabriel and Elena stand together in the moonlight with an ease that felt entirely earned, watching the collected wolves of 3 different territories celebrate a peace built not on convenient illusion, but on the harder, more lasting foundation of truth, openly faced and genuinely overcome. Ashwood has always found its strength in unexpected places, Marcus said finally. A frightened young patrol wolf who refused to stay silent. A healer who trusted her instincts even when nobody else would listen. An alpha willing to admit his mistakes and change course because of them. And, in the end, even the person who once threatened to destroy everything we built, choosing instead to help us become something stronger than we ever were before. Ivy smiled, watching the celebration stretch late into the clear, moonlit night. That's the story worth remembering, isn't it? Not that they trusted the wrong person once, but that even the wrong choice, faced honestly and corrected with courage, could become the foundation for something better than anyone imagined possible. Above them, the full moon continued its steady climb across the clear night sky, bearing witness to a pack that had faced betrayal in its most painful form, and had chosen, deliberately and together, to build something genuine from the wreckage. Whatever challenges still waited in the years ahead, Ashwood Territory now stood united by a trust that had been tested in the hardest possible way, and had, against every reasonable expectation, emerged not broken, but stronger, wiser, and more truly bound together than they had ever been before.